All right. Well, Caroline, as it happens, when I rearrange my screen, you are
I'm
now
first.
up first.
Okay, so thanks to Adriana, I got in touch with this friend of mine that I haven't spoken to in
Oh, right.
13
Yeah.
years. And we had this wonderful conversation Sunday night. Another climbing friend of mine and I and Kelly, and she's in touch with Adriana, and they're going forward. And Kelly even said if she couldn't answer the question, she's got a couple of paralegals and some colleagues. So I'm thinking, she's a really wonderful person. So, but she only does estate and probate. But I think we've got a source there, and who knows, she might be able to tap into other
Yeah.
private, not you know what I mean, non-legal aid attorneys for forms that are not, specifically legal aid type forms. So that we might have a resource for more substantive people if
That's really
we
cool.
need it. Yeah.
Great.
And then and I'm reviewing Trevor's interview I think tomorrow for that's the DTA thing.
Yeah.
So I think that'll be pretty cool.
Yeah, I think it's yeah, it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Caroline, since
think
you've been
that's-
looking at a lot of these forms closely, how close do you think they are to really being ready to launch in from the ones you've looked at? Like
You
Student
asking me
forms.
or
Yeah,
David?
The student
I've been
forms that
looking
you've
at,
seen.
I will look at all of my student ones. I haven't started grading yet, but I don't know. Just curious what you think.
Quentin, are you asking me or David?
Yes, you. Yeah.
You,
Oh,
Caroline.
me.
Yeah.
Well, the only ones I've seen are Adriana's and Trevor's. Oh, you mean when we were looking at the demos? Is that what you mean when they were doing those demos last week when we were reviewing those together?
I mean, I guess that's a little bit of a vague question. I'm just, yeah, I mean, I
don't think any of them are ready to go yet.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing that it was not part of the assignment, as far as I know, is I think all of them ought to have an instruction sheet. So when you get this, what do you do with it? Because I think that's one of these problems that we've heard forever, even on Mass Legal Help, is, or it's all about what to expect, right? Yeah. I have this form. What do I do with it? I've come out of the courthouse with my whatever. Now what happens? And I think people they need really explicit, even if it's, not for the DTA forms, but even if it's call the clerk and ask them how you should file, still people should have, this is beyond what we were talking about in terms of instructions, but what happens once I file, then what, and whether we provide that or whether we just provide a link so that people know what happens. I think that's, as I'm thinking out loud about this now,
I like that.
I think that's a need that people have that we don't always realize. It's, you don't know what we don't know what people don't know because of what we already know, kind of thing.
Curse of knowledge, it's called.
One thing that I'm thinking about is like structuring a teaching exercise where people can still learn and help finish these forms so that they actually can get used for real life. Because I think the key thing that we're missing in this project is like,
I think instructions would be helpful for, it's kind of the next round. It's not yours. The problem is it's not going to be the same class, is it? Because they're doing different, they're not starting again. So they're going to be jumping in at a different place, but they will have to understand what the whole legal kind of background context is. And then what do they do with it? And I think lots of times law students come out of law school with no practical, unless they were in a clinic, right? And so what would you tell somebody to do with this? And figure it out what you have to do with this, and then what should they expect? That's not the class you're teaching now. And you could use the tech. They can still learn the tech to be able to communicate this, but they're learning different. They kind of have to learn the legal issue involved in the form, but also the practical. What do you do with this now that you have it? I don't know. That's totally.
No, this is helpful. Yeah, I'm still designing my syllabus for next semester a little bit.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to figure out how to fit that in, and that feels kind of what my thought was. And yeah, it does feel like that would be like a really valuable.
Oh, good.
I'm not sure. I hadn't thought about specifically the instructions pages, but I think that could easily fit in a law school class more than the tech that we have. Even though that's technically the focus.
Yeah, yeah.
So, okay. Anyway, tangression or not digression, but either way, yeah, that was good to
At
hear.
least it's not a transgression.
That's right.
All right, then. Next up, Michelle.
Michelle, I don't think I have, I mean, I have maybe stand-up type stuff. I've been trying to think what kind of management type stuff I have. But my mind is blank. Just came from something else, so not focused.
All right, well,
So we can do the stand-up stuff later.
yeah,
if
we can
that's
swing back
fine.
by for stand up.
Sure.
Kate?
I don't think I have anything. Sorry, I'm like just beyond swamped in my real job, but I figured this would actually be like a break from that. So I popped in, even though I don't
Sure.
have anything to add.
Well, we do appreciate the company.
Oh, good.
All right, then, Quentin.
Not much really that requires a lot of discussion. I am still working on some things to improve the wizard, with the big one being that I sent an email out on LSNTAP and shared on the channel, like thinking about what kind of people are listed on our form. So like the roles that people might play, particularly ones that last from case to case. So not things like petitioner, but things like landlord or tenant. That doesn't matter what side of the case they happen to be on. It just matters. It's something that they have about their real life. I think that might be really helpful. I dropped that link on the channel. If anyone has time to take a look at it and add their own thoughts, it'll be great, or share it to other folks that might. And eventually this might be connected to the taxonomy that David and Stanford had been working on. And I think we're going to further integrate that with the forms that we're using. Because actually our list of big level categories on our front page for courtformsonline.org is pretty close to the list of the top level categories inside NSMI or list, it's being called.
List, yeah.
But it's not exactly the same thing. So I think like lining those up might be really helpful as far as like.
And there is a underlying movement that Stanford is trying to make with a large search engine that might be located in a state somewhere, to use list data encoded in schema.org to help for discovery. So if we have all that data associated with our forms now, then exposing that so that it would be visible in search would be an easier thing to do for the day when they turn that on, and then we can just immediately become the top source for, whatever.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, so right now we have a robust text that stops people from crawling the actual forms, but that would be great for the website. So yeah, that's good to know. That was gonna be my other questions. What can we do to have this meta information visible to people?
Yeah, it's a fun project that we get talked to about, but because our name isn't Stanford or the other law schools that the company that is a search engine wants to work with, we don't get to say much, so we just listen. Anyhow, there's this whole thing about involving like the law school libraries and helping do vetting and labeling for authoritative sources, but
That's a good idea.
we'll see what happens. It's been we've been talking about it for a couple of years now. We'll see. All right, Bryce.
This is still my first management meeting, so I'm not sure what to bring up for
That's
management
fine.
stuff.
You have big old ideas.
Big old ideas.
Sorry, big new ideas.
Big new ideas. Not really at the moment. I I still feel like any big ideas that I have to offer, like I feel like anytime I'm like, do we do this? And then I like will like sort of like wait a day and sort of like listen to stuff, and I'm like, oh, we do this. And so yeah, I don't really have too many ideas that I don't think I've already seen tossed around. So.
That's fair. I did get an email. I did get an email. And anything else? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Timing's hard. Okay. I did get an email from a couple months ago. I was on a talk with someone from Pro Bono Net who had worked on the DC courts, their equivalent to the 209A form. And it had been this long, 4-year project, sure cost tons of money. And it was a very weird setup because it was like they talked about here and we spent 4 years and we did this and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, we spent 4 months and we did this and blah, blah, blah. And it was all free. But they were doing nice work, and I put out, I'm like, oh, well, maybe there's something we can do together, or some nebulous something or other. And I got an email back today. So right after that, they're like, oh, I'll talk to our executive director and our IT person and blah, blah, blah. And then I got an email where they reached back out and are wanting to pick up that conversation. So this is sort of fortuitous, because Quentin and I had previously been talking about places where we might involve Pro Bono Net and other folks with some of the work we're doing. So I just wanted to throw that out there as a free-for-all for people's thoughts. It's very nebulous. Maybe I should explain what Pro Bono Net is to people who don't know what Pro Bono Net is.
I mean, it sounds good. Bring more people in. I don't know what it is, but hey, you're excited. I'm excited. Sure.
Well, I was gonna try to shift it off on to Quentin, because he's had more experience with Pro Bono Net, but he's walked off and is now filling up his tea.
Well, I was gonna say Caroline probably has
That's true. Caroline probably has the most,
and she knows who Pro Bono Net is.
And to be clear, this is a
That's
contact that seems to have gone parallel and adjacent to Claudia. So for whatever
Parallel
that's
and
You wanna tell me
adjacent
who?
to Claudia? not Claudia. You
not
mean?
Claudia.
So you
Claudia is not my contact.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's difficult to know, because I had a conversation with some people at Pro Bono Net.
Let's start with what Pro Bono
Last
Net
week.
is. Yeah,
Well, okay. Well, I'm not really sure.
that's
I
a
mean,
good
they
question.
started off, I think Pro Bono Net started off as the platform for law help, providing, I guess it's private company. It's a bunch of legal techie people who hired lawyers who were interested to help states build their law help websites across the country. And in 2004, I think there were about 30 American states that were using their platform to deliver their law help websites. And Legal Services Corporation, which is the national federal funder for many legal aid programs in the country, has this tech funding branch. And one of the legal aid programs, it might have been Washington State, I'm not quite sure, I can't remember who, applied for a grant, and then that grant funded a national server that Pro Bono Net then administers. And that was specifically for these interactive online interviews, which we're using A to J Author, which was sort of the friendly face, and then Hot Docs. And so Pro Bono Net was in control of that, which is now called Law Help Interactive. But I think Pro Bono Net is still the parent of Law Help Interactive. So Pro Bono Net is both providing law help websites, and it's a very strict, rigid format. So you just plug your logo in and you plug your content in, and then you've got a Pro Bono Net site, it's marvelous for many programs when they have like half an attorney just trying to get information up there for their clients. But it's old, and they have that's what they still do quite a few law websites, and they also do legal program websites as well. So you don't have a lot of flexibility. They're trying to adapt, but they're quite a large system with a, with a format you have to follow. And I think, and then the last thing they've done, so they were doing these interactive forums with A to J Author and Hot Docs. And then in the last few years, they've become more interested in working with courts so that people can do the next step, which is what we were trying to do, is to actually do e-filing of the forms. But e-filing is its own creature, which is not just emailing a file to a court. You have to, it has its own sort of definition where there have to be protocols back and forth, and users have to set up accounts, and there has to be a funding mechanism, and there's all this back and forth confirmation. But they're doing, Law Help Interactive under Pro Bono Net is doing e-filing now in certain states, and it's pretty complicated. But that's what I know they're doing. And then I talked to somebody called Veronica last week, and Tim Barron, and Tim is the New York Law Help. I can't remember because it's quite a big place, but he's doing New York Law Help and some other stuff. And then Veronica is kind of his boss overall, and she's doing a lot more. I think it's all New York, but I think she's organizing legal aid programs. She's talking a lot of tech legalese stuff, which I wasn't really sure of. But we had this conversation because I'm trying to figure out on Mass Legal Help and New Hampshire Legal Aid about how we can be anti-racist. So I've been trying to have this conversation for months with Tim in New York. He invited Veronica, and then somebody called Kenneth Elliott, who runs the Law Help website in South Carolina. So, but we had these two people from Pro Bono, and they were sort of talking about what they're doing. And so it's a much bigger beast than I realized. And I think, I think in many ways they're based in New York, but I think there are other people who are doing stuff as part of Pro Bono Net that isn't the New York thing. Like I'm trying to think who was Liz Keith. Isn't she with Pro Bono Net too, Liz Keith?
I'm not sure about Liz Keith. Well, I mean, you mentioned people not in New York, so like Claudia's not in New York. She lives.
Yeah. She's right, but she's Law Help Interactive.
Oh, okay. So the Pro Bono Net parent. Okay, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, originally she was with Pro Bono Net, I think, because I think Pro Bono Net, I don't know if owns is the right word, but I think they're the sort of the big, and it's Mark somebody. It's Mark. He's a computer programmer, developer turned business person.
Yeah, it's Mark somebody. I don't remember his last name.
Yeah, I can see his face. I just don't remember his last name.
Not Mark
So-
Lauritsen, obviously.
No,
Is
not
there-
that
is
It's
there
Mark.
not Mark
Larson?
Lauritsen. It's another Mark.
Spelled the
Yeah.
other way.
Mark Larson that works together. I don't think it's either.
Anyhow, my contact is Miranda Megan Healy or something.
Oh, okay. Sure.
Oh, Miranda, she's in Chicago.
Yeah, she's in Chicago.
Yeah,
so
so
she-
she works very closely with Claudia.
Yeah.
So she's not, so I think anything Miranda does, Claudia knows about. So I think you're good on that one.
So anyhow, she was just looking for a call to explore more stuff, and so I wanted to sort of think about what that might be. They had just, like I said, this came off of their having basically worked as a contractor for DC to build a 209A form. And I was just wondering sort of what natural synergies
Well, the
might there
first,
be.
yeah, I mean, I think the first thing that comes to mind is being the national server, but we don't want their branding.
Yeah, I think we have other routes that we're exploring for places that could
Server.
stand up servers.
Yeah,
And I'm really happy with sort of where those are going.
great. That's a huge.
but- Quentin, do you say they were exploring the idea of working with DocAssemble as something you? So
Oh, yeah. I mean, like they've actually started. They've set up servers and started on the engineering side. I don't know where that has gone though. I kind of felt like it stalled, but
I mean, the thing, they do a lot of fantastic stuff, but the drawback is the branding.
Yeah,
And
well, we don't.
They serve like 1 million forms a year. Like they're
Yeah.
Yeah.
a lot of great stuff.
But what I'm saying is they have a really good network of developers across the country and internationally in terms on the Law Help Interactive part. And that's what pro bono, I mean, I think that's the bit, if they're talking about DocAssemble, they're talking about Law Help Interactive.
Yeah, what was it? Did they have any context for what kind of connection that they wanted to make, Miranda wanted to make?
No, there wasn't much. It's all, I was just reviewing the emails and there actually isn't an email that sort of sparks it off. But it was the conversation that we had offline just about, we're doing similar work here. We should try not to reinvent the wheel. Maybe there's some places where we can talk. I think since having that conversation, my mind has shifted more towards this notion of like the work that Bryce is working on and our discussion that Quentin, you and I had about if we're going to build this, plugin that's going to let DocAssemble talk to these e-filing systems. If to the extent that they're using DocAssemble, then that's an interesting thing to them, I'm sure. And so, that's naturally sort of where I'm going to thinking, well, we're building all these DocAssemble tools that would be freely available for you to use. Maybe we want to talk somewhere there. And I think Quentin and I, our idea was as we're moving towards the work Bryce is working on and implementing a standard, to the extent that we have to fill in holes in the standard, the existing standard, that it would be nice to have buy-in from larger community and feedback about how those holes should be filled so that there's more likely to be adoption going forward. So that's sort of the general, that's like where I'm feeling, but I don't know.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
You
collaborate on like the standard formats.
I think one thing that would help is because I don't know how many states they're working with now, but I remember when they first started doing e-filing, they were frustrated because of what the court was requiring.
Yeah,
so
all frustrating.
Law Help Interactive had a better the people at Law Help Interactive and the developers for those forms had a better sense of what their users needed when doing e-filing, but the courts, the particular state, they were very strict and didn't really want to listen. And so Law Help Interactive was invested in trying to get this e-filing off the ground. So they went with what the state wanted just so that they could get the e-filing. But I do think that because they're actually doing it, they can probably share a lot with you all. And the other part of that is to sort of flag issues that were problematic, between the courts and the system, and maybe to have us think a little bit more about, I think we're at the point where we're establishing pretty good credibility and reputation. I mean, we're new, but I think people are learning that we're worth it and to pay attention. And if we can, in some ways, if we can say, this is the way our e-filing is set up. If you here are all the advantages you can get, but this is the way we're going to do it, so that our priority stakeholders are our users, and we're going to try and make e-filing available for them through the courts, but we're not going to sacrifice too much for our users. And so the one concrete example, which I think is really important, is for users to be able to go through their form, complete it, get it to whatever they want, and then decide if they want to create an account with the court and e-file, etc. I think people really need to be able to have the opportunity to experiment with forms, see what it feels like, feel safe, etc., before they're required to set up an account. And to me, this is like one of the biggest barriers, and that Law Help Interactive had to struggle with the state that they first worked with. The court didn't want people to even look at the interview without creating an account at court. And I think that's terrifying for people.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think that's very much in the line with the conversations we've been having and the project that we have Bryce working on, which is this idea of setting up this standard methods for doing things.
Yeah.
So that's good to hear. I always like when I hear the same things over and over again. It makes me think we're onto
Yeah.
something, or I'm just in a bubble. But
It's talking to the right people, right?
all right, then I think then what I'm going to do, they asked for some times either before the 18th to have a talk or in the new year. So Bryce and Quentin, I think you should be on that call too. So I'll respond back and
can I just, I know we're about to start a stand up, but the other thing is that I'm sort of trying to stay focused on, and came out of the conversation that I had with this anti-racism statewide website is, and they've got, Pro Bono Net / Law Help Interactive has money. They always need money, but they have it. Is as we're thinking about these things, is to think about feature, like where is the unconscious implicit racial bias in the stuff we're doing, and just to look for it, look out for it. And I think we do that to some extent in our interviews. Like, I mean, Quentin, you were talking about this whole, we were trying to combine ethnic backgrounds for the defendant information form. But there's things that Veronica brought up, and I don't even know how to begin to think about this, but how features work. And I'm sort of, it's percolating in my mind right now. But like, I don't know. I can't even really think of anything, but how would some features be perceived, et cetera, et cetera. And then when I talked, we also have a UX person the next day, we're getting a UX audit, is if you don't include Black and brown developers and designers, you are going to get implicit racial bias. Just it's the way it works. So that's another thing to think about. So I don't know. I just want to throw that out there. It's like every time we think about new projects.
No, that's good. And I like that. I think the first step, you said you didn't know what the first step is. I think the first step is you raising the issue and making it explicit.
Yeah. Exactly.
I think it's similar in some ways to that question about gender, right? Like, how do we approach? There's usually only a place for like male or female. So how do you approach asking questions about gender that is inclusive in that context?
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that's a lot. I think the place where we really have something to add there is in the development of the question library of basic questions. Because that's the thing where I see us having a reach beyond. I mean, obviously we can do it within our own work, but the place where I see us being able to have a reach and effect is in those basic questions as other people might adopt them. So I think that's an important thing to think about.
I mean, that's a really interesting idea, David, because I hadn't really been thinking about that as something that would be outside of our project, but that makes me wonder, it shouldn't exist as YAML files, that maybe
Yeah, I think they should explicitly exist as, I mean, it's a question of how modular the project is, right? If we have other people who are standing up assembly lines, then it's going to be, it will necessarily be a part of that. But I'm thinking about
people who build A to J author interviews, they look at our library of how we ask the questions and use those. Like that's what, yeah.
I was thinking more along the lines of maybe Law Help Interactive in their DocAssemble development to make it easier are just going to, incorporate those. And then by virtue of doing that, we'll have incorporated our work. I mean, if we do establish ourselves as really nice models and people who have thought about this, then maybe people will look at them that way. But I do think that if we make them things that people can just plug in to do easy questions, then they're going to get used places. So we should think about that reach.
As long as people know about it. So we want to make sure people know about it. And I think the other thing we want to do is let people know that we're thinking about these issues, because nobody would be able to tell by just looking at stuff really. Yeah. But if we I've been thinking a lot about this, about whether we should have an affinity group at the TIG conference in January. Because when I talked to this UX person on Thursday, she said, nobody's even asked me about this. And so and it's beyond just plain old usability. Yeah. So, or user experience.
All right, well, this is a great conversation to get started. It also reminds me of, we started pulling all these threads. There's so many things that like we do need to do a better job of getting out there and talking about our work so that we can attract people to help us fill in the places where we're missing. But I think looking at the time, and since Luke has just joined us, and I assume he's here for stand up, why don't we, I'll stop and restart so we get into our stand up gear, unless there's any more management